Starting off this countdown, we have cardiovascular disease. So obviously you can get heart disease here on Earth, but turns out that astronauts are more susceptible to it. Even if they went into space completely healthy with no heart problems, they could still develop cardiovascular disease. In fact, those that went on space missions have a 4 to 5 times higher rate of dying by cardiovascular disease. Scientists are still trying to pinpoint exactly what causes it. It may be that the astronauts' exposure to radiation is more severe than we thought. So in space, the cells lining your blood vessels are more vulnerable and therefore get more damage from the harsh conditions in space. In fact, scientists are warning astronauts that future trips to Mars will shorten their lifespan greatly. In our 9th spot, we have space hitchhikers, and I'm not talking about humans that want to hitch a ride to space. We're talking about pathogens that astronauts carry with them on their missions. They might feel completely fine before launching, but space greatly lowers their immune system. Not only that, but space actually increases their virulence and growth, so it becomes stronger and could spread more easily. One test was done on staph, salmonella, and E. coli. They found that these bacteria reproduced more rapidly in space flight conditions. This is very problematic because it leads to increased risk of contamination and serious infection while in space. In fact, in 2006, NASA sent salmonella into orbit aboard the space shuttle Atlantis. The astronauts on board grew salmonella in space. When the shuttle returned to Earth, they infected mice with the salmonella and found that the salmonella from space killed mice faster than salmonella cultures grown on Earth. Isn't that insane? In our 8th spot, we have space disease. Going to space impacts astronauts both physically and psychologically. In fact, being in space has been known to cause a number of mental disorders, including anxiety and mood disorders. NASA thoroughly tries to prepare astronauts for space, but sometimes astronauts still get affected by the different conditions and being so isolated for so long. Like one second you're on Earth with gravity and the next you're shot full speed into a place with no gravity that could easily kill you. So yeah, that definitely is going to affect your body and brain health. A number of astronauts have returned home and developed severe anxiety, depression, and personality disorders. It's very sad and something that NASA hardly talks about. Moving on to number 7, we have the extraterrestrial sources. In the 1979 book Diseases from Space, authors and astronomers Fred Howell and Chandra Wickramasinghe claim that many of the common diseases that affect us actually have their origins in space. These include the flu, the common cold, and whooping cough. Of course, research is still ongoing to see if this is really the case. For example, they apparently took samples of cosmic dust and gas clouds, and they found that they had a match for desiccated bacteria, the bacteria found in influenza and other illnesses. However, their study was met with great criticism and many don't believe their findings. In our 6th spot, we have moon dust. The moon is actually a very deadly place, not only because it's hundreds of thousands of miles away from Earth, but because of its dusty surface. The moon's surface is filled with lunar dust, which are very tiny and sharp toxic particles. The particles are 50 times smaller than a strand of human hair, and if inhaled, it can stay in your lungs for months. The longer the particles stay in your lungs, the more dangerous it is. When the Apollo astronauts returned from the moon, they had moon dust all over their spacesuits. It made their throats sore and eyes water. The particles are so fine but are sharp like glass, so it felt like they were constantly breathing in sharp pieces of glass. Long-term exposure can destroy lung and brain cells. It can cause lung disease or weaken your immune system, which can lead to a number of other diseases, which is why astronauts are very careful about not getting moon dust on their suit, and if they do, they have to decontaminate themselves. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the disease on Mars. A number of scientists are worried about the colonization of Mars, if it even does happen. Why? Because there's still a lot we don't know about this big red planet. For starters, they believe that there could very well be single-celled organisms living underground. If we go to colonize Mars, that means we would have to tap into the planet's subterranean resources. By doing so, this could release some unknown germ or bacteria. And as I mentioned before, bacteria in space is more serious and spreads faster. In our 4th spot, we have the Apollo missions. In 1968, during the Apollo 7 mission, Commander Wally Schirra came down sick with a head cold only 15 hours after launch. which was a nightmare. Without gravity, mucus can't just drain out of your nose, so he was suffering really badly, and blowing your nose only makes it worse. Shortly after, it spread to his colleagues aboard the shuttle. Then in 1970, with the Apollo 13 mission, a number of astronauts got UTIs. In fact, Fred Hazy's UTI turned into a kidney infection. Basically, all sicknesses or diseases in space are horrifying. 1. They spread super fast. 2. They impact astronauts twice as much, which can lead to other serious health complications. And 3. There's no serious medical treatment that they can receive while in space. Moving on to number 3, we have the toxic fungus. Turns out that when spacecrafts return from space, they're often covered in space fungi. On top of that, there are fungi living all over the International Space Station. The study done on the fungi has determined that it is Aspergillus flavus, which is known to produce carcinogenic and immune suppressing compounds. This fungi is known to form when it is stressed, and obviously space is a very stressful situation. So it's the perfect environment for it to thrive. Scientists are currently studying the toxic effects that it has on astronauts and what diseases exposure to it can cause. In our second spot, we have Disease X. This is the name given to an unknown disease that space could be harboring. According to new research from scientists in Canada, Spain, and the US, and I quote, "Every day more than 800 million viruses are deposited per square meter above the planetary boundary layer. That's 25 viruses for each person in Canada." Which is insane. If this is the case, then chances are there's an unknown disease out there that hasn't come to Earth yet. Maybe this disease is unlike one that we have ever encountered before. We won't know until it hits us. And in our number 1 spot today, we have solipsism syndrome. Solipsism syndrome is a mental disease that affects astronauts who stay in space for a prolonged period of time. It's described as a disease in which a person feels like the world outside of their mind is no longer real. The prolonged period of isolation and different conditions in space contributes to the astronauts feeling this way. It has unfortunately affected a number of astronauts, and it took a while before scientists figured out what was going on and actually gave a name to this syndrome and acknowledged that it was real. However, they still don't know how they can prevent astronauts from developing this or how to help cure astronauts with this.
Alright, coming in at number 10, we have space snakes. Dr. Musgrave is a trustworthy man, or at least his credentials suggest he must be. Not only is he a NASA astronaut, he has 6 degrees, and he's a doctor and a mathematician. He has made 6 space flights, and he believes that there is life out there. In 1994, he said, "On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I have seen a snake out there." What? It's not just a wee little space snake either. He said that it was 6, 7 or 8 feet long. He said that the snake followed him around for a long period of time and he tried to communicate with it. Space snakes, honestly. Dr. Musgrave thinks that they must have their own propulsion technique, which honestly is just baffling and is a can of worms or snakes. Coming in at number 9, we have asteroids. Astronaut Chris Hadfield conducted a Reddit AMA and he discussed something that scared him. He said, "Sometimes we hear pings as tiny rocks hit our spaceship, and also the creaks and snaps of expanding metal as we go in and out of sunlight. The solar panels are filled with tiny holes from micrometeorites." Honestly, that really terrifies me as a person who's like a bit scared of flying in an aeroplane. This would deeply stress me out. He also said, "I watched a large meteorite burn up between me and Australia, and to think of that hypersonic dumb lump of rock randomly hurtling into us instead sent a shiver up my back." Like, I'll say Chris, mate, Jesus. Coming into number 8, we have the formation. Gordon Cooper, the last American to spend time in space alone, has had a couple of very strange experiences in the skies. The first happened when he was a member of the Air Force. He was flying with other pilots in 1951 when he saw, I quote, "a vast armada of UFOs flying in formation at extremely high altitudes." I'm sorry, but vast armada, that is terrifying, not just one curious UFO, a whole fleet. On top of that, in 1963, Cooper was shot into space aboard a Mercury capsule to circumnavigate the world. As he was passing Perth, he noticed a fast-flying green object that was also picked up by Australian tracking systems. Now, the press were briefed that they were not allowed to talk to him about this. Why? Like, seriously, why? Coming into number 7, we have the check mark. American astronaut Leroy Chiao was the commander of the International Space Station in 2005. During his time up there, he saw some extremely weird things. He explained his encounter to the Huffington Post by saying, "I saw some lights that seemed to be in a line and it was almost like an upside down check mark, and I saw them fly by and I thought it was awfully strange." Could this have been the formation that Cooper was talking about? Some skeptics even tried to pass the lights off as far off fishing boat lights from Earth, but to be honest, I'm skeptical of those skeptics. Coming in at number 6, we have magnificent desolation. What is it like on the moon? Utterly terrifying according to Buzz Aldrin. Buzz, as we know, was the second man on the moon. Yes, televised recordings of the moon can be seen, and yes, we have high-res photographs, but truly knowing what it feels like to be up there is something only a handful of people can talk to us about. In a Reddit AMA, Buzz Aldrin describes his experience. He said, "My first words of my impression of being on the surface of the moon that just came to my mind are magnificent desolation." He continued by saying, "There is no place on Earth as desolate as what I was viewing in those first few moments on the lunar surface. Beyond me, I could see the moon curving away, no atmosphere, black sky, cold, colder than anyone could experience on Earth when the sun is up." While that sounds totally incredible, it also sounds like the beginnings of a total existential breakdown. Coming into number 5, we have the spheres. In 1981, following the Saljut mission, the USSR cosmonaut Major General Vladimir Kolyvanok gave a press conference in which he shared some very interesting information. He said that he looked out of a porthole and saw something he simply couldn't explain, something impossible to the laws of physics. He described the object he saw as spherical and elliptical, saying that it exploded into a beautiful golden light. After that, he saw 2 more spheres and a white smoke sphere cloud. Then, as they flew through the Terminator, the name for the zone between light and day, he lost sight of them. Honestly, how fascinating and terrifying at the very same time. To me, it's also weird and interesting how Russia appears to be more forthcoming in discussing things that they've seen in space, whereas the United States are keen to keep a lid on it. Why do you think the United States are so heavily guarded on what they'll say about what they've seen in space? Honestly, I don't know. Coming into number 4, we have the knocking. In 2003, Yang Liwei was the first Chinese astronaut to be propelled into space. Now, I understand the loneliness of space might send you a little bit mad, but he said one night that he heard a strange and continuous knocking. He said, and I quote, "Someone was knocking on the body of the spaceship just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer. It neither came from outside nor inside the spaceship." I'm sorry, but honestly, what? Isn't that some of the creepiest space descriptions that you've ever heard? It seems he wasn't the last to hear it either. 2 further astronauts heard the same space knocks when they went up there. What are these? Coming into number 3, we have the music. Listening to the transcript of the words said on board Apollo 10 is bone-chilling. The spaceship passed by the dark side of the moon, and as it did, the astronauts heard a very weird ethereal music. This is what was said between Eugene Cernan, Thomas Stafford and John Young. "That music sounds out of spacey, doesn't it? Do you hear that whistling sound?" "Yes." "Boy, that sure is weird music. We're gonna have to find out about that. Nobody will believe us." Later, Cernan said, "That eerie music is what's bothering me. You know what? I hear it too. Who is going to believe it? Nobody. Should we tell them about it?" I don't know, I think we ought to think about it some. It seems that the Apollo 11 crew heard it too. What was it? We don't really know. Coming into number 2, we have heat is rising in the capsule. So this is really sad and really disturbing, so do skip forward if you aren't ready for something truly terrifying. In 1967, Russian cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov did not make it back to Earth alive, something he suspected would happen when he agreed to be the solo pilot of the Soyuz 1. His spacecraft malfunctioned and he was quite aware he was going to die. Some of the last things he said can't be translated into words. He was screaming and crying words of anger. Among the last words that can be deciphered are, "The heat is rising in the capsule" and "You've killed me." Honestly, that makes me so sad. Finally, coming into number 1, we have "They're watching us." Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, had something very scary to say when he arrived at the moon in the Apollo 11 mission. It was something he spoke about once but never spoke about again. In a secret transmission to NASA, according to the retired chief of communications system Maurice Chatelain, the first man on the moon's first words were actually, "Oh God, you won't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us." Now this wasn't heard by the world as the broadcast was dropped for 2 minutes. Armstrong never spoke about it again, although a lot of credible sources have confirmed that this is what he said.
Starting us off at number 10 is the pattern. So this news actually came out at the start of this year when researchers who are part of the Canadian Hydrogen Intensity Mapping Experiment put together a paper based on data from their radio telescope. Now from September 16th, 2018 to October 30th, 2019, they recorded 28 fast radio bursts from a spiral galaxy. Now I'm about to go Jimmy Neutron in this place and explain some scientific concepts to you. So fast radio burst is a radio pulse that lasts anywhere from a fraction of a millisecond to 2 to 3, and they occur due to a high energy process that we are yet to discover. Now the telescope recorded an FRB every 16 days, which is the first time we've recorded a pattern of messages from outer space. The cycle would include the burst coming through for a 4-day intense flurry, with the signal being recorded every hour to then nothing for 12 days. Pretty sure it's an intelligent civilization somewhere out there trying to send us a message. I mean, what else could explain it? The researchers have pinpointed the source to a huge spiral galaxy about 500 million light years away from us, but that's still the closest signal we've had in a long time. Some believe the FRBs must be coming from a binary system because other objects in space have done the same thing. The source could be swinging around a black hole or a star, and that's what's causing the pattern to be like that, but I don't really know. Coming in at number 9 is power. So continuing on the whole concept of FRBs, we need to talk about the Lorimer burst. Back in 2001, astronomers discovered the first ever FRB, and they named it the Lorimer burst. It lasted for a total of not even 5 milliseconds and came from about 5 to 11 million light years away, meaning when it was emitted or released, Earth hadn't even formed yet. Mind blown. Either way, within those 5 milliseconds, this FRB released so much energy that the sun couldn't even release that much in 4 months, let alone 5 milliseconds. That just spooks me the hell out, because for us mere mortals, the sun is one of the strongest things in our world, and for this signal to be stronger than the sun, well, I'm kind of super interested to know where on Earth it came from, or, you know, not on Earth it came from. At number 8 we have the burnt cosmonaut, and believe me when I say the story is actually more dramatic than a title I gave it. So back in 1960, the Utica Cordelia brothers were working as amateur radio operators when they heard something they think was from the Soviet space program, which is really important because in the 60s the Soviet Union refused to disclose a lot of the deaths of their cosmonauts. Forget disclosing it, they would straight up hide it or lie about it. They'd be like, oh, there were no people on that spacecraft to begin with, so who cares if it imploded? Everyone? Anyway, fast forward to November of that year when they caught the SOS signal of a woman returning to Earth's orbit, and from the recording you can tell that the spacecraft is malfunctioning in some way, like something just isn't right. The woman says the words "I'm hot" in Russian before the spacecraft goes up in flames. How haunting would hearing that be? It would scar anyone for life. And when confronted, the Russians claimed it was an unmanned craft that got burned. There was not a single mention of this woman, who the brothers straight up heard die. Filling at number 7 slot are the blinking stars. I feel like stars blink all the time. Now I barely see any in the city because of the lights and the pollution, but they're always like twinkling, literally almost blinking at you. My favorite constellation, not that you guys asked, but that I'm gonna tell you anyway, is for sure Orion's belt. You know, the 3 stars in a row. I've always loved that one. Anyway, back in 2016, a group of Canadian astronomers saw 234 stars that were all blinking together at the same time. 234. That is not a small number by any means. Now the guy who made the discovery, Eric Trottier, believes it happened because of aliens, and I mean, I do agree with him. He believes aliens are pointing a laser in our direction, and that laser is causing a difference in the light of these stars and how we see them. And if that theory doesn't make sense to you, then swallow this one. Maybe every single one of these stars is a separate civilization, and they're working together in an effort to talk to us. That is a great team effort, I'm not gonna lie. kudos to you. Now number 6 is the black hole. I've always been fascinated with black holes. I mean, I've always heard that if a human entered one, our atoms would stretch exponentially and then we'd just cease to exist. I mean, would that hurt? Like, if we survived, would we just pop out the other end of it? I need answers. Either way, back in 2011, Edward Morgan worked as an X-ray data collector at MIT, and he collected data on this far, far black hole. Morgan then transmitted it into a sound that even us mere mortals can hear, because in reality, the sound is so deep and low that the human ear cannot pick it up. Dog and cat ears maybe, but not us. Now, the sound itself sounds like anything that entered that black hole would immediately be sucked into the ether, never to be heard from again. Like, it's crazy. Now let's have a listen. The tiny skips you can hear are actually the infrared jets coming out of the hole. Like, why can we hear this black hole and not others? What is this hole trying to tell us? Coming in at number 5 is the roar. Yup, you best believe there's a galactical kraken out there that let out the roar of its ancestors. Well, not really, but that would be a freaking good story. So during the 213th meeting of the American Astronomical Society, they discussed a super loud signal that they had heard. And I know we've mentioned loud or strong messages and signals in this list, but this one may be the loudest. In 2006, when they heard the roar, it was 5 times louder than any of their predictions. This roar they heard was 6 times bigger than all combined radio wave sources ever. Roar indeed. And number 4 is frequency 4462.3, also known as our closest chance. Now, the really interesting thing about this signal is the fact that its source is a star, and it's been the closest source to us that we actually have on this list. The star is called TYC 1220911, and it's only 100 light years away from us. I know I'm saying only like it's 2 minutes away. I get it's far, but it's the closest one to us on the list. Now, the star sent a 10-second signal that scientists picked up on and were very interested in. They believe that it must be another civilization or aliens trying to grab our attention because of the proximity of the star and how close they really are. They're basically our neighbors. They're probably sending us a signal like, do you have spare milk? Did not get groceries today. If they even drink milk, I don't know. The filling at number 3 slot is the wow signal, which sounds a bit like an advert for Signal toothpaste, to be fair. Wow signal, buy it for $3 today. But that was a tangent, the story has nothing to do with toothpaste. Now, back in 1977, the telescope at Ohio State University detected a signal coming from the Sagittarius constellation. And after you hear the audio, it literally feels like some alien got a hold of an ASMR microphone and is just breathing into it real heavy. Now, the signal lasted 72 hours and it perplexed the staff so much that they wrote wow in the margin of the paper the signal was recorded on, hence the name. Now at number 2 is SHG 602+14A. Again, not the name of Elon Musk's other child, but let's not put it past him, shall we? So that long name was what scientists labeled the source of this radio signal that they had discovered. But here's the weird part, the signal seemed to be coming from empty space. Like, yes, they tracked it further and found that it was coming from this area between the Aries and Pisces constellations. However, there had been no stars or planets near the source for 1,000 years, so it's like, where the hell is it coming from? Now, the signal came at us at 1420 megahertz, which is significant because hydrogen takes energy at that frequency, and it's the most commonly found element in our universe. This is a big deal because scientists have thought to use hydrogen to contact extraterrestrial life before, so the fact we received a signal at this frequency is insane. Someone could be trying to contact us this very second, and I'm too busy doing a top 10 video about it. Well, not this very second, probably way in the past now, and they've probably forgotten they've even tried, but still. And finally, at number 1 is the Cassini-Huygens mission, or Huygens, not really sure. Now, this mission was a collaboration between NASA and the European Space Agency, and it launched the first ever spacecraft to enter Saturn's orbit, which is a pretty big feat if you ask me. Now, in 2002, the spacecraft recorded Saturn's aurora, which is caused by the planet's strong magnetic fields. And obviously, we can't hear the signal ourselves, since that's one of the many shortcomings of being human, so the university lowered the signal dramatically so we could hear it too, and it sounds scary as hell, like straight out of a horror movie scary.